I'm quite new, so I apologize for my lack of knowledge regarding this creature. One thing I must come out and say before I go on to tell this story is that this encounter did not happen anywhere near Navajo land. Therefore, I am leaning more towards a Wendigo, or not deer. If I should move this, please let me know. It was late summer, and my mom and I had decided we should go out for a spontaneous hike. We did our research and found one that said it was a 4-mile round trip. Sounded easy enough. We got up early that morning and began our trek. The entire forest had a horrible vibe. Even my mother picked up on it. She's never been into any of the paranormal, etc. We've been walking for hours now, and this forest just seemed to get weirder and weirder. We had plenty of water and food, so I really can't say if we were just dehydrated or tired. We began to hear singing in the woods, and we just stopped and stared at each other. We had to be miles into the woods by now, our step counter saying we have well surpassed the promised 4 miles. Where exactly were we? Where would the singing be coming from? We just looked at each other and began laughing. I remember her saying, "No way," shaking her head, and carrying on. It's been quite some time now, and we have not encountered another person on this trail. Suddenly, this man walking really fast surpasses us and rounds a bend behind a rocky hill so we cannot see him anymore. He said no words, just came up behind us and darted past. Again, me and my mother laughed and envied his athleticism, until we rounded the bend ourselves to find that he is completely gone. Out of sight. The path after that bend was fairly straight, and you could see far ahead of you, so there is no way he would have been able to clear that entire area fast. This time, my mom stops and says, "You gotta be kidding me." We're thoroughly freaked out after this. Eventually, we reach the peak, and after walking that long, you'd think somebody would probably want to stay there for a while and enjoy the view. Well, we pretty much got to the top, looked, and then left. We never discussed it, but I could tell we were both uncomfortable and just wanted to get out of here. We're maybe halfway back through this trail now, and the sun is beginning to set. We're moving fast to get out of here. Our step counter said that we had hiked 10 miles compared to the 4. As the forest got darker, I began to hear leaves crunching behind us. I reluctantly turned around and noticed it was a buck, several yards away. We hurried along as to not disturb it further, but then I began noticing something. It was following us from a distance. It did so, almost like a predator, hiding and peeking. I tell my mom we're being followed by that deer, and we're pretty much at a jog now. The buck would not let us go. I would sometimes notice that it would catch up and follow just beside us. It always remained several yards away though, always lurking, head down. I've lived out in the country my whole life, and have seen all the deer you can ever imagine. I've never been followed by one like this. This seemed more than just curiosity. It felt horrible, predatory. I felt like I was in danger. Always hearing those footsteps behind me. The feeling of being watched. Clearly, we made it out unharmed. But I wonder if it actually intended to harm us, or if it was just ushering us out of the forest. All in all, it was a freaky experience. Something is up with those woods. Last year, I was living in a small mountain town in central southern Colorado, in the Rio Grande National Forest. A super small town. Ute natives were tragically killed in the entire area of the town. I don't usually get creepy vibes when I'm there, but it's definitely weird in many ways. I was in my car at 2 a.m. with a friend. We were parked outside our house, looking down the road with only the streetlight across the street, lighting up the area. From 15 yards in front of us, we see a large animal emerge from the darkness and catch the light. We started asking each other, "What is that? It's so big." Like the size of a small horse or a big deer. It walks toward us and stands 1 yard away from my door. We were frozen, unable to move while we stare at it so close to us. And I say, "Is that a wolf?" It's all I could think it could be. Tall, completely silver, looked like a wolf from a movie. As it stands so close to us, it looks up to the sky to the left, then the right. Then, it runs away, toward the large cliffs at the back of the town, where the abandoned mines are, and a large forest begins. We were stunned, stayed frozen and silent for minutes until we began laughing. Eventually calmed down and went inside, confused as hell. After that, I told some coworkers thinking how cool it was that I saw a wolf. They all said it was impossible. No wolves have lived there for decades. So I researched. They're right. No wolves have been here for like 40 years, and it would be a miracle if I'd seen one. Especially a gray wolf. As I look at more pictures of wolves, my memory becomes more clear. What I saw was too tall and silver to even be a gray wolf. My friend and I have not forgotten one detail of the story. I'm sure it was not a dog. If it was, that's the biggest dog in existence. I remember the world washing away as I stared at its shining fur. It was the most majestic animal I've ever seen. There were chills covering my body, and I could barely breathe. Do you think that I saw a skinwalker? I'm not sure how to begin this. This didn't just affect me, but my family in different ways, and it continued to mess with me for years after we moved from the house where it all started. I'm trying to take something that did many things over several years and just trim it down to details that seem important. I'm sorry if this reads weird or awkward. My grandmother was supposed to have traced her side of the family all the way back to an unregistered family of natives that escaped the Trail of Tears, and after telling a person this strange thing that I normally kept secret, they suggested that it might be a skinwalker. But I don't know. I know there are a lot of family strife in that house where the haunting started, that bubbled up to the surface. A spirit there liked to scare me by calling my name, slamming doors, giving me strange nightmares, and even mimicking the voices of family to other members. The first time I can think of it appearing is when we were coming back from a road trip at night. Dad was driving, and he hits the brakes hard and swerves because he'd seen a wolf with no eyes stepping out into our lane and look at our oncoming car. Because everybody else was asleep, he was the only one to see it, and there was nobody around to suggest that anything had physically been there. The second time I think it showed itself was many years after. We had long moved from the house that this all started in. I was home alone at night, messaging a friend, and I seen a huge figure walking up the road. I was frozen in fear as it approached, and eventually passed by the house we were living in, and what I remember was something with a strange skull, kinda like that of a monkey skull, as a head or covering its head, and the rest completely hidden behind a cloak of some sort, of dark-colored fur. It hasn't been around for a bit now, but while it was around, or possibly pursuing me, it had caused a lot of hardship for me and my family. I remember that if I talked or thought about it too much, I would draw its attention back to me when it seemed like it had left, and I would have let my guard down. Whatever it is always made me feel terrified and unsafe. I used to have symbols of protection from whatever religion I could think of to try and find some sort of protection from it. I'm not sure what this entity is, but this is not a story I share much, as I know how it sounds, and I don't want to go through the normal ridicule and dismissive comments. So, this was when I was a lot younger, and I lived in Texas, probably around 9 years old. You know how when you're younger, you just don't remember as many details, and it all seems kind of dreamlike. And this was like that, except I'm almost 100% sure it's not a dream, based on how clearly I can visualize certain aspects of it. I should just get into the story, but if you've had similar encounters, please tell me. Anyway, I love animals. Like, I just love watching nature documentaries about them and studying them. And when I lived in Texas, we had a farmer's pasture at the back of my house, separated by a rusty cattle fence that was around 6 to 7 feet tall, based on the fact that we had to climb a fair way to get over it when we accidentally lost balls on the other side of the fence. The cows would sometimes come within looking distance of the back of my house. The farmer's pasture was huge, since we were in a semi-rural area, and that day, I could see them in the distance, so I went out to watch them and tried to lure them over to me. I had been gazing intently at them for I don't know how long, when I looked to my right and saw a huge buck next to me. It couldn't have been more than a foot from me at most, but I never heard it come up beside me, nor do I know why it would have done so, seeing as deer are very easily spooked at the slightest movement. Anyway, at the same time as I saw it, it saw me. We locked eyes, and that's what I remember best, was that its eyes were oddly intelligent and humanish, and it seemed benevolent. We stared at each other for at most 30 seconds before it was gone over the cattle fence with a metallic clang. I can only assume that its back hooves struck the fence on the way over, because I remember the clanging noise and it rattling like a metal fence if you kicked it. I think I was also grasping the fence tightly, because I remember that I felt the force of the metal as the buck clipped it. I looked out to the field to follow where it had gone, and saw another big deer, a doe, I think, bound into the smallish thicket that was probably 200 to 300 feet away from the fence. After they both disappeared into the thicket, I could not catch sight of them anymore, and I ran in to tell my mom what I had seen. I told her that it clipped the fence on the way over, and I remember her saying that it was probably a yearling. That ends my encounter, but there's some weird things about it, more than the already weird premise that I wanted to point out. Number 1, the buck was huge. I think I came up to its shoulders. Now, I was 9, so it makes sense, I guess. It just seemed really big for a yearling. Number 2, how could it have walked up to the fence and not noticed me standing there? It just seems very, very unlikely. Furthermore, how did we manage to look at each other at the same time without noticing one another before? And why did it hold my gaze for so long? It seemed benevolent. If it was a skinwalker, I don't know why it would be, but that's all I can think of. As I mentioned before, it seemed intelligent. Maybe that was just my kid brain, shocked at all. But it seemed as though it was staring into the depths of my soul when we locked eyes. The buck and other deer bounded into the small thicket and then completely disappeared. I couldn't see them afterwards, even though I'm pretty sure I spent at least a minute looking for them. The thicket wasn't big either, so I should have been able to spot their silhouettes or something. Anyway, that's all I can think of for now. Me and my friend were driving down the road. He and I were just driving at like 11 at night. We were coming home from a friend's house, and we were just listening to music really loud. Firstly, the radio started going off. It then played I Stand Alone by Godsmack, which we don't have downloaded on his phone. My friend Calvin said, "Did you change the song?" And I said, "No, I'm on my phone." "What?" Then Calvin said, "I don't even have this downloaded." Not a minute later, it turns off and goes to static. We just sat in silence for a moment, and then it started playing other music I did not recognize. I was shaking, and I think he was too. Calvin said, "You're not messing with me, right?" And I said, "No, dude, I'm shaking. This is freaking me out." Then, his light bar went out on his truck. We both screamed, and I admit, I was actually about to cry. I've had similar experiences, but nothing this bizarre. The light bar came back on. At this point, something the size of our truck ran in the middle of the road and ran across. We were screaming things like, "Dude, what is that?" We saw it in the rearview mirror as well, and as we passed the song, the Skinwalker started playing on the song. We didn't have this downloaded, and I never heard it. It was just the beginning, so it ended the song fast. But it all stopped. The static stopped. The light bar was on. We couldn't see it in the mirror anymore. At this point, we were going 80 miles an hour down a hill that's meant for 50, and we're just hoping to get back to civilization soon. We were at least 30 minutes from my home and the nearest neighborhood, so we tried to talk about it. Our music resumed again, and it was normal. This all happened in the span of 5 or 8 minutes. I don't know what happened, and I know it sounds too good to be true, and it sounds almost too perfect, but I just hope it at least entertained you or allowed me to share my story. Have a good night, and enjoy yourselves. Cindy was my best friend at the time, so she came with me to this new house. Sorry for the bad formatting in advance, as I am on mobile. I've never shared my story on here, as I'm not sure what it was because I don't live anywhere near a res. I live in Florida. I cannot think of any rational explanation for what I saw, however. First, some backstory. I lived in a city nearish Orlando and went to school with a girl who I will call Cindy. My mother worked at a different school nearby as a teacher. We were going to move towards Central Florida in a very rural, absolute middle of nowhere area after school had ended. So, it was Cindy and I's last day of school, but my mom still had to teach for another week. She drove us out to the new house to stay there on our own for an entire week while she finished work, and would stay with my grandmother in town. So, Cindy and I are so excited to have the new house to ourselves for a week, and to go get set up in my room and stuff. We decided that we wanted to still go on late walks like we used to, and thought about going that night. We agreed we should go while it's still light out. because we don't know the area that well. All my area was a giant square-shaped road, or block. It wasn't really a block though, because any houses there were just a mailbox and a gate on the road with a driveway that went out for like half a mile until you saw the house. So, we're walking on this square road around dusk, and we get to the corner of the road, go to turn, and watch this absolutely massive deer walk out of one side of the road from the trees, maybe 50 yards ahead of us. We kind of just stopped or slowed to look for a second, because although I'm from up north, she'd never seen a deer being from the city, and I had never seen one so close. This thing also was a buck, and again, huge, so I told her not to get too close, as it could be dangerous. All this happened in like 5 seconds, while it walked to the middle of the road. Then, this deer stops in its tracks, turns its head to look at us, and just stared for what felt like 10 seconds, realistically. We just kind of watched this deer like a staring contest. Then, it turns its head forwards again, stands up on its hind legs, and starts limp walking into the other side of the trees. Then, we just watched the trees rustle a ton and walked home. That's when we were like, yeah, did we see that? We hadn't walked the rest of the week, and Mom came home earlier than expected, so we felt better. So here's where I'm not sure of anything. This deer's legs were not only what they should look like. A deer's legs are opposite of ours, or a dog's. When they stand on all fours, their back knees pointed behind them instead of in front. This deer's legs did not point behind them. Its knees faced forwards, as if they had been twisted around perfectly. My mom worked in her family butcher shop as a kid, and had seen deer brought in with ankles that were twisted and broken, and healed in a completely new position. It makes sense, as they can walk on 3 legs as that one heals. I can't see how this could have healed both of its legs, or how they both twist so perfectly, or especially how it would walk on those legs alone. I think the fact that its legs were backwards is why it somewhat limped forwards, although it clearly didn't have any broken or twisted bones. It did not appear to be in pain. It had antlers. No idea if it had ears or a tail. I hear everybody say it won't have a tail if it's a skinwalker. I had no idea what skinwalkers or any cryptids were at this point. All I paid attention to was its size, which had to be at least 8 feet tall, standing with a slight hunch, and its legs. I remember we mentioned it smelt like a rotten egg. I don't recall a coppery scent. It could just have been sulfur, but I'm not sure. Despite looking this thing right in the eyes, it was too far away to even see them. And my horrible vision, of course. So I can't tell you what those looked like either. I didn't look for all the telltale signs you look for in a skinwalker, because again, I'd never even heard of them. I have so many questions about this experience. Why didn't it try and attack us? Why was it in the middle of Florida? Why would it almost show us that it walked like that, instead of, I don't know, keeping its cool? If that's not what it is, what did I see? Cindy and I are no longer friends, so I'm not sure if she'd even remember. I think the only reason it stuck with me is when I heard stories about skinwalkers. I felt my heart sink into my stomach and remembered this. I do have a Navajo friend who refuses to speak about this with me, and I fully believe skinwalkers exist, if that's not what I saw. I've heard of flesh gates, but I have trouble believing other things because they don't have Navajo ties, which my friend does, and clearly believes in. I don't know how much about flesh gates except they're basically skinwalkers, without Native American connotations. maybe that's what I saw. Maybe this deer was also just severely deformed. Have you ever seen anything like this? This was about 5 or 6 years ago, by the way. The stories of Navajo medicine man, or shamans having encounters or altercations with skinwalkers, is one not largely outspoken by them much, like a Vatican exorcist. Most modern encounters today are either a host seeking help from the medicine man, either spiritually, holistically, or physically. In most ways, they are like priests. People find comfort in their prayers, blessing and guidance in times they don't understand fully, or seeking just to be enlightened by words, wisdom, or knowledge. They are also like an alternative psychiatrist or therapist, with experience in medicinal remedies, psychological therapy, or physical therapy. From what I was able to piece together from bits and parts of other stories, a group of medicine men, when horses were introduced to Navajos, some with their own abilities being mediums, energy drawers, conduits, some supernatural or natural would investigate claims and rumors around the Navajo Nation, seeking out these skinwalkers, or spiritual and unexplainable phenomenons. Peoples who become host to its strange phenomenons would seek out these medicine men for help, some even traveling hundreds of miles to the southwest. In one such encounter, I've heard from an elder is that when he was a young boy, becoming a man, his grandfather's grandfather would ride around the Navajo Nation and off, sometimes going as far into the Canadian territories to the Northern Territory of Mexico, helping people of all ailments, spiritually and physically, under discretion and some form of payment. He then talked about when they would come across definite proof of demonic hauntings and presences, much like how a church would investigate demonic presences. One encounter he does remember that happened in the heartland regions of the Navajo Nation. An elderly man spent a week herding his livestock to their winter property. When he finally returned home in the day, he found that his wife had not prepared their wagons with their belongings, but, seeing her rifle and horse were gone, she must be getting supplies or went to visit other nearby residents they know in their rural region. Times back in the day for Navajo, they kept busy all day, much like ranchers and farmers. They were always cautious of strangers, and burglarizing and ransacking of property was common, but low. Land tracking was a very common skill before it wasn't. He then noticed nothing was disturbed or out of the ordinary for them, but had a feeling his wife went to a nearby friend's. His gut feeling was right, and seeing that his wife was there, but also asked why she left their place with their valuables and wagons unguarded. She told him the following: that one of the goats came back and only stood in one direction, stick in hand, an attempt to snap it out of whatever trance it was in. It screamed and dropped dead. She thought it could be the ailments or termites in its horns, eating away at its brain. She did not want to waste whatever was salvageable. She butchered the goat and hung its wool skin to dry in the sun, putting the still intact headless goat in back of one of the wagons. As she went about, finishing chores to pack the wagon, she heard rattling outside. Thinking it was a rattlesnake on the property, getting ready for fall, she went to find it, but came to notice the sheepskin was gone. Thinking somebody is on the property and robbing them, she went into the hogan to get her rifle. Gun at the ready, she didn't get far before noticing that the goat skin was dragging on the ground. Thinking it was animals instead, she followed the dragging trail and kept an eye for an animal in the distance. Instead, she noticed not far ahead, the skin hide was dragging itself, gliding over the ground. She shot at it more than several times, but it kept going towards some washes in the land with hill terrain. Unsure of what she had seen, she decided to not stay the night and left to the neighbors. Hearing this, the husband had her and the neighbors go find the local medicine men, common in the area, but would be a couple of days. Returning with an elderly medicine man, 3 men accompanied him. The wife then showed them where she stopped following the skin, and they went on from there. Unable to accompany them, the husband and wife kept a bonfire going all night as a waypoint for them to see in the night sky. Late into the first night, one man came back and asked if they could spare a horse, as one of theirs had fallen into a ditch and severely injured itself. They had to shoot it. Agreeing, they let him take the husband's horse, as it was fast and knew the area. Into the next day, no sign of them returning happened. Then, night came. They built the bonfire again, so they would be able to see if they are near. Not long after, another one of the men came back and asked if they could spare another horse. Agreeing, thinking something again happened to their horse, they took the wagon horse. Later into the night, the final third man of the group came to the house and asked if they had yet another horse they could spare. Anxious on an update, the husband asked if they had found the goat skin. Not saying anything else, the third man asked again if they had another horse to spare. The husband agreed meanly, only that he can check on his other horses. The third man agreed, and they rode into the night. Coming upon a ridge in the night, lightened up by the full moon, and the third man rode to the sound of a sweat lodge ceremony the medicine man and 2 other men were doing. Coming upon the sweat lodge, he respected the strict custom around medicine man in the middle of ceremonies. He stayed silent. It is custom among Navajo culture to be silent during a ceremony and not to break the concentration of the medicine man, and strict lesson, never question what they do. The third man told the husband not to look into the open. He had to keep the glowing dim lava rocks hot, and not to look back until they are done. While he sat there, with the low dim fire, and keeping the rocks hot, listening to the chanting, he seen a blurry white mass out in the distance below. No ambient light came from it, only a white mass, like something wearing all white in the moonlight. Being atop a cliff, looking down below to a barren, flat desert and washes, he's seen it darting left and right, going into washes and coming out, going hundreds of feet in no pattern, faster than a horse can run, and way faster than somebody who can even run fast. Twilight was coming up, and the white mass disappeared into a wash to his right, and never came back out. He observed everywhere below to see where it was, and still listened to the song the medicine man and his assistant were singing. He could hear the heavy footsteps of his wife's horse, and he did as what he was told, and did not turn around once to check on the horse. But then, the heavy horse thud's steps got closer to him, in a rhythm of 2, like someone walking, and he was on high alert to turn around. Then, he felt a hard clutch on his shoulder. He screamed and cried out in agony, yelling, and was ready to fight whatever it was in the night. But it was the old medicine man. The husband was frightened by feeling, a strong feeling, and a heavy presence. The old man asked what he was doing far out, away from his home. Confused, He said he came along with one of the old man's assistants to check on his horses, but instead, he made him a fire watcher. The old man, with concern, said they had seen the skin and they were chasing it into washes to trap it in the high sand walls. But it had killed 2 of his men the first night when they entered the wash by collapsing the side walls when they got close to the skin on the ground. He and his last assistant went on to trap it in the cliffsides during the day, but he could not get to the top of the cliff to where it was at. So he went ahead, and his last assistant stayed where it had last seen below. He went along around the cliffsides to find a trail up, but that took most of the day, and he came upon the husband. He followed the smell of dead animal and seen scattered meat and blood. Then heard the sound of a drumming ceremony in the night, but could not tell where it was until the sky lightened up from the early morning. Then he had finally seen him there, sitting near the edge of the cliff. Thinking he was being tricked, the husband opened the makeshift sweat lodge doorway, seeing inside. It was made of his horse's bones and not wood. And there, laid on the opposite side of the door, he seen the goat skin. The medicine man took the skin, and they burned down the sweat lodge to ashes and bonfire. The husband asked how a skin could do all that. The old medicine man explained that something else in the night came for the skin on the second night. They thought it was him, the husband, coming out to find them, but it wasn't. They rode to the sounds of heavy galloping and dark flashes of something in the moonlight. In the nights, they hunted it like predator animals and tried luring it into washes or caves in the washes by sacrificing one of their horses to collapse in the high sand walls, but no avail. Returning back to the husband's house, the wife told him that where she had put the carcass of the goat, it was gone, and no tracks could be seen. When time came to go to their winter property, they never returned back to their original property. Time passed, and the sand dunes and the hogan, with no upkeep, soon fell apart over the years. When it finally collapsed in, it was never rebuilt. The way the Indians do is to dry their corn and dig a hole beside the hogan and put it down there. Then they put a stone over it and some dirt and weeds so no one will find it. And then they take their goats and sheep back into the mountains for the winter. When they want some corn, they go to their hogan and get it. A family did that, and after a while, they needed some more corn. They had a very pretty daughter, and lots of men wanted to marry her. They sent her with her little brother to go get it. They both rode on one horse, and when they got there, they said it was too late to go home. They would get the corn in the morning. So they went into the hogan that they were going to sleep in. They had tied the 2 front of their horse, and he went off to feed, but he kept coming back to the hogan, and his ears were up. He could see better than they could in the dark, and the girl knew somebody was out there, because in the afternoon, some men had been near there, and one man said, "Now I can get that girl," and all the other men went away. And at night, she saw a dark shadow in the woods. She knew a human wolf was after her, but she did not tell her brother. So she dug a hole under the hogan, and she told her little brother to get into it. If anyone came, he was to crawl outside and ride fast to their family, and she would try to fight as long as she could. She tied the blanket over the door as much as she could, so it would take the wolf a long time to get in, and the boy could get away. Then, later in the night, she heard some mud fall off the top of the hogan, and she knew the wolf had come. The boy crawled out, and he cut the rope around the horse's feet. He jumped on the horse, and the horse was scared. He didn't want to stay there, and the boy didn't need to whip him or hold the reins. He ran as fast as he could, and the boy held on to his mane. Then the wolf came in, and she fought him as hard as she could. Pretty soon, the boy got home and he told his family, and his father and mother got on their horses, and they rode as fast as they could back to the sister. Her big brother was not at home. He had made a long bow and lots of fine arrows with eagle feathers on them. He could sure shoot. He went out hunting that day and stopped at a hogan for the night. Indians do that when they are away from home. That night, it snowed a little, and the next morning he said, "This is a good day for hunting. I guess I will shoot some rabbits." And it was snowing, and he had some good new moccasins with heavy soles, and he had his feet in burlap sacks to keep them dry. It was snowing, and he was a fine shot. He could hit whatever he wanted to. He saw 2 rabbits, and he took 2 arrows and he shot them. He never missed. He was riding along, and he saw a big track, but the snow had covered it, and he did not know whether it was a horse or a man or some animal. So he blew the snow out of the track, and then he knew it was a human wolf, and there was blood too. So he followed that track. He followed it all day, and toward evening he came to the edge of a mesa, and he crawled slowly to the edge, and he had 1 arrow in his bow and 2 in his mouth. At the edge, he came to the last track made by that human wolf, and there was no way to get down that cliff. So he circled around, and he found just 1 narrow path going down. He went along and saw a big stone lying against a cliff, and he knew that was where the human wolf was. He pulled back the stone and went into the cave, and saw nothing, and pretty soon he came back to a black curtain. He pulled that back and he went in. There was a narrow passage, and he went along for a half mile. Then he came to another black curtain. In a half mile he came to another. Then he came to a 4th one. He pulled that back and found himself in a big room, which was round like a hogan, and he saw lots of men and women sitting around. They were the ones he had seen at dances or ceremonies and around the hogans. He saw skeletons and bones and jewelry and lots of things around the walls. He thought, now they will kill me. There was a small room at the left, and he went in there and he hoped they wouldn't see him. There was a big fat man, and he was chief, and he was singing. And all these people, even girls and boys, were learning how to be human wolves. The fat man said, "There's an old lady who has died about 200 miles from here, and I want 2 men to go there, dig her up, and take her jewelry." So 2 men came in front of him and sang over them, and he said to be careful. They took their skins and went out. Then the people said, "There is a boy in here, and he does not belong to us." So they brought him out, and they put him in the middle, and they wanted to kill him. He was thinking how he could get out of there. He wanted to get their eagle feathers because that was the main thing to all this, and then everything would go wrong with them, and they would have to stop. But they were all around him, and they were watching him. And up on the wall ahead of him was a girl's head, and he kept looking at it. But he didn't know it was his sister. Then the man said, "Do you want to be a human wolf?" He didn't want to, but the man said, "You can study to be a wolf, or we will kill you." So he agreed. And all the time he was thinking how he could get out of there. On each side of the door, they had a big dog, so if he ran out, they would make noise and stop him. Then they passed some meat. He didn't want it because he knew it was human meat, but he did not know it was his sister's. He thought he had better take some, So he took a piece, put it near his mouth, and then he put it down inside his shirt. He thought, when I go out, I will give a piece to those dogs, and they won't make noise. Soon, the man fell asleep, and the boy pretended he was asleep. He snored, yet all the time he was looking around. His eyes were almost shut. Then, after a while, all of them were asleep because they knew the dogs would make a noise if he tried to go out. Then he got up and took his bow and arrows, which they had taken away from him. He took a bunch of the eagle feathers. He took a step toward the door, then another, and then one dog began to growl. Then he took the meat out of his shirt and broke it into 2 pieces, and gave a piece of the meat to the dog. They were hungry, and they wanted that meat. Then he ran through the curtain as fast as he could. They had put wood and stones behind the curtains, so he would have a hard time. But he got through, 3 of them, all right. And then he heard a lot of noise among those people. He sure had a hard time getting through that last curtain, and he had to push big logs and stones away. And then he ran as fast as he could. He was a fine runner, but soon he heard a wolf over there, and then over there, and then he knew they were all around him. He came to a badger's hole, and he pulled up a big weed, and crawled into the hole and pulled the weed down hard so it looked like it was growing there. Pretty soon the noises stopped, and he pushed up the weed and looked around, and heard someone coming. He went down again, and the fat man came running, and he ran right over the hole. He heard him say, "I wish we had killed him like I told them to." After a while, the boy came out and ran home, and when he got there, the sole of his moccasin was worn out, and his foot sore. In 1 or 2 nights, there was a war dance near, and his family went over there. But he didn't because his foot was sore. But later, he took his bow and his arrows like a cane, and he thought he would walk over there. When he got there, he saw that same fat man who was chief of the human wolves, sitting on a big white horse, dressed in fine clothes, and he had lots of necklaces, jewelry, and bracelets, and his wife had too. The boy said, "I'm going to shoot that man." So he ran around the circle of the wagons and people until he came behind him. Then he put an arrow in and gave a long pull. He aimed at the man's neck, shot the arrow, and it went in so far that only a little bit, 1 inch, was showing. Story 1. Squirrel hunting in Texas. 1978. The first visual experience that I ever had came deep in the woods from the road. I had walked about a mile down in the woods where I came upon a flat. I could see all the way through the flat to the other side, which was roughly 175 yards. On the other side of the flat was a stand of reset pine, all about 15 feet tall, with dead grass underneath. Immediately, I noticed something laying underneath a pine tree across the flat. At first, it looked like the area below the tree and the trunk of the tree had been burnt out. As I eased closer, it began to look like a gorilla laying under the tree. I am a pretty stealthy person in the woods, and I told myself, I am just seeing things, but I'm going to try and get closer to this thing, just to prove to myself that I am not seeing this. As I moved within 100 yards or so, I could see that I was not crazy. Its head was moving, and at this time, I could tell its color was gray with a black gorilla face. The adrenaline kicked in. I checked my gun, put some trees between myself and this thing, and proceeded to try and get closer. Peering around the trees every few feet, just to see if it was still there. I got to within 50 to 75 yards, peering around the tree, and it was now gone. The floor of the flat was dry, with a lot of crunchy leaves and twigs. I knew I was going to scare it off before I could get as close as I liked to. After I noticed that it was gone, I sat down in the flat for about an hour and did not see any wildlife at all. I then got up and went over to the area where I had seen it and was hit with that smell. The grass was mashed down underneath the pine. At first, I don't think that I knew it was there, because it was moving its head and acting unconcerned. As I tried to sneak up on it though, it definitely sensed my presence, or heard me crunch a twig. I know that it never visually made me out, because I kept trees between myself and it the entire time. 1979. It had rained sometime between 3 a.m. and when I had set out to go squirrel hunting. It was very foggy and misty on this morning, and the woods were damp and quiet. I came upon a large thicket and sat down against a tree at the edge of the thicket. Instantly, I began to smell something. As it got lighter out, light enough to shoot, I could hear something in the thicket. Also, I noticed there were no squirrels moving. I thought that there were some hogs in the thicket. I sat in this spot longer than I normally would sit somewhere without seeing anything, because of the sounds that I heard coming from the thicket. About mid-morning, I was hearing something sniffing the air, making low, deep grunting sounds. This was no hog. I decided to play a trick that I have used before on game in thickets, and throw a 2-foot section of a dead limb over and beyond the sounds, hoping to flush it out to my side. When I did this, it made a deep and louder primate-type grunt right at me. The sniffing of the air also became more pronounced, and no hog breaths like this. I then threw another stick into the thicket and received the same grunts and sniffing, only louder. About 20 minutes later, I heard it moving through the thicket, and then heard a huge 2-legged splash into a body of water on the other side, followed by grunts and heavy breathing. And there is no doubt in my mind what I had encountered was a Bigfoot in the thicket. Although I never saw him, this was something I had never experienced in the woods before. After the splash and exit, I made my own hasty exit back to the road. Story 2. Nearly colliding with a Bigfoot. January of 2004. My girlfriend at the time and I were on our way to visit family in Texas. We share an apartment in a suburb of Houston. The quickest route to my mom and stepdad's house is through Cleveland, Texas, and we take 105 from there to almost Counts. Around midnight, we left from Kingwood and traveled through Cleveland onto 105. We had been on the 105 for about 20 minutes, about 45 minutes from Kingwood. We were approaching the Trinity River bottom when I noticed something in the center of the road. My girlfriend was dozing beside me, and I yelled, thinking we were about to be in an accident. She sat up and screamed that we were about to hit him. I locked the brakes of her truck up, and when I did, whatever it was stood up in the road and started to run to our right, towards the woods. My girlfriend began to open her door, and I grabbed her to stop her. She yelled that it was a Bigfoot. I had heard of them. I mean, who has not? But to be honest, until that very moment, I would have never believed that they existed. By the time I looked up from her, the creature was standing on the side of the road, watching us. When she opened her door, the creature made like a squalling sound and turned into the woods. I think it was around 7 feet tall. I'm not too sure. I do know it was quite a bit taller than myself. It was black in color, but it had what looked like mud on its legs and arms. The fur or hair was long. It was on my girlfriend's side of the truck, about 10 feet away, and she said its hands were long and the thumbs were not right. I'm not sure what she meant, other than they looked longer, I think. To be honest, not too sure how to describe that. Where the thing was squatting in the road was a doe that had been hit by the car. I'm not sure if it was looking or feeding on the doe, but it had been moved by it. You could see where the creature had shifted the animal on the road, or at least it looked like that when I got out to look. I've read on the BFRO, when I decided to post my incident, that there was another lot of other times. When we got out, I really could not remember any other thing, or any other odor, or anything else that was strange. I'm not too sure of what else to tell. Story 3. Running Away. My wife and I were crossing the Trinity River on the Highway 101 just before sunset on May 29th, 2004, after having been to a baseball game. The west bank of the Trinity was a long sandbar, and there were a few people, roughly 10 to 15, spread out alongside the sandbar, doing various things. There were a few kids and a dad camping, 2 guys sitting on a tailgate. There was a couple farther down fishing, and there was another truck backed up to the sandbar with its stereo playing. My wife and I drove down to the sandbar, had to engage the 4-wheel drive to avoid getting stuck, and turned around to go back to the highway. We got back out on the highway, and my wife asked me to drive on across the bridge to the other side. I did so. My wife saw that she called a waterfall off the left side of the bridge. Actually, it was just water running over rocks in a small creek off the Trinity. We turned off on a dirt road just past the bridge, drove over a small wooden bridge over my wife's waterfall, and came to a gate that was locked with 2 separate padlocks. Keep in mind that this area is very heavily wooded, swampy and marshy in areas, and very highly inhospitable once you step foot into the woods. At the gate, we got out of my truck, climbed the gate just to look around the area. We could hear the music and the kids playing across the river, probably a quarter of a mile back across the bridge. On the other side of the gate, the road turned into a 2-track trail. There had been vehicles down there, probably within the last month. We walked down the trail. The sun was setting, and it was starting to get dark. This was very impromptu, and we had not planned for this jaunt at all. My wife had heels on. I walked on ahead, probably 30 feet ahead of my wife. There was a sign that indicated that the area was a private hunting club area. We were very quiet and made very little sound. It was then that I saw it, about 40 yards down the trail, where the trail turned sharply to the left. It leapt across the trail, much like a long jumper, landed on the right side of the trail, and leapt again into the woods. Quickly, quietly, and in the blink of an eye. It was a rustic red color, about 6 feet tall, and extremely fast. In an instant, my mind tried to ascertain what it was that I saw. I kept telling myself, no way, no way. But my databanks could not process it or link it to any other creature that I had ever seen. I saw no face and do not remember seeing arms or feet. But I did see an upright something about 6 feet tall leap 10 feet across the trail and spring into the woods. I turned to whisper loudly to my wife, "Did you see that?" No. She was busy dealing with a slimy, slithery something that slithered across her foot. She was quite distraught, and her encounter happened at exactly the second that mine occurred. When she realized what had happened, she quickly jogged up to me, and we jogged to the spot of the crossing. When we arrived at the crossing area, we could hear the animal still running through the woods, sending birds to flight near its path. It was then that I smelt a musky smell, much like a horse, actually. We looked for tracks of any nature, but found absolutely nothing. The creature cleared the road, and the road was the only place that tracks would have been made. We turned to look to the left, and there in the woods was a clump of uprooted trees with fresh sod still on the roots, as though they had been recently been put there. I'm sorry, but I can't say with certainty that what I saw was a Bigfoot. But I can say with certainty that what I saw was, number 1, rustic orange-red. Number 2, approximately 6 feet in height. Number 3, incredibly fast. Number 4, appeared bipedal and upright. Lastly, number 5, not a deer, coyote, cat, horse, human, fox, bear, wolf, hog, dog, or any other indigenous animal that I have ever seen in Texas. And I was raised in the backwoods of East and Central Texas. We had no cameras with us, but even if we had, the creature was way out of sight before I could have ever drawn any camera, and he was way too fast for any hope of pursuit. We summarized that perhaps he had been watching the people across the river from a very safe and secure position until he saw us coming up the road, at which time he fled in a panic. He probably saw us long before we saw him. When I first saw him, he was in midair, leaping across the road. He touched down, sprung up and into the woods. We heard him for a few seconds after we arrived at the crossing area, and then it went silent, save for the people noises from across the river. We thought that he may have stopped and surveyed us from a hidden position. We looked around for just a few minutes and had to return to the truck. It was getting dark in a hurry, and we were largely unequipped. If you or someone you know has a story or encounter they would like to share with me or have me read on this channel, please submit it to stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. You can find the email in the description below. While many of these stories are not my own, I've acquired them from over a period of time, from many people I've talked to many people I know. Call me a wannabe amateur cryptozoology researcher, or something of that nature. But I just enjoy collecting stories of things that are not supposed to exist. The topic in question is the sighting and existence of the goatman. Is this a folklore tale, or is this more true than ever before? Well, around the Blue Hill Mountain area, settled in northeast Georgia, there's far more encounters and sightings of this particular cryptid than ever before. I've had many eyewitnesses come forward with their own harrowing tales of seeing this supposed beast walking around, stalking their houses, killing pets and family members, and far, far worse, by terrorizing entire groups of communities. The first story I wanted to share with you was by an older gentleman who lived by himself against the Appalachian Mountains, kind of more tucked into the woods, not entirely a loner. But his wife had passed many years prior, and all of his children grown up and moved far away. He didn't have much, but he was by himself. This man was not a man of ghosts, supernatural, God, or angels, but he could not deny the existence of what he calls the goatman, because he had seen it with his own two eyes on multiple occasions. He described it as exactly what it sounds like: a creature looking to be half human, half goat, a perfect hybrid of the two, but not in the way that Greek mythology depicts them, with a flute in the mouth and being very gentle, docile beings. These things, from what he told me, were very violent and attempted to take his life on several different occasions. He told me, and his words were, that he believes this thing targeted him because he was an easy target, being elderly, all alone, as if it made him more fragile and weak and easier to overcome. But they never did. He kept an old rifle, passed down from his old grandfather, that he had claimed to me saved his life on more than just one occasion. These things, for whatever he also told me, have a fear of fire. He would light torches around his house, as well as looked into handcrafting some sort of handmade flamethrower-like device, not like the ones you see in movies, but some way to project flame directly out forward without being too dangerous. However, he never did achieve such a thing. Along with the fear of fire, they also appear to only be nocturnal, and that they've only ever tried to break into his house during dusk or nighttime. He's never seen them during the day, only when the light is low enough, but describes them with the words demonic, horrific, and vicious. And this same old man, and for the sake of his identity, I'll keep his name anonymous, but we'll call him Henry, just so you can understand who I'm referring to, claims that he had been living in the house he is for well over 30 years, but has only recently started to see them in the past 10, which he believes is a cycle. They only come around every so few years, for a short amount of time. And that's what he believes. Judging from other encounters and eyewitness stories, I don't exactly myself personally believe that. It could just be that they travel through specific areas, through specific years and seasons, but I don't know. I'm trying to gather as much information on Goatman as I possibly can. It's a rather new cryptid for me, so I'm still learning as I go. But, like the Skinwalkers of the Navajo region, and other cryptids that appear to be specific to different regions of the United States and the world, I've only ever heard of Goatman in the South, ranging from Texas all the way to the East Coast. So, myself, I'm wondering if this is some sort of demonic summoning ritual, or perhaps there is something more at play here than any of those things. Anything I can comprehend personally, because by the different accounts that I've read and been told, they all lead me to different directions as far as this creature's origins. Henry's encounters with these goatmen seem to come and go, and last I spoke with him, which was just a few months back, he hadn't had any encounters with these things for at least a couple years, which is good for him. Another lady, whom we'll call Annabelle, had a family with a husband, 3 kids, and a dog, living very close to Texarkana, which is the border to Texas and Arkansas. She said that she saw one in the process of strangulating her Rottweiler until her husband shot it right in the head, but didn't even seem to hurt it. But the shot was successful in driving the creature away, Whether that be in fear of getting shot again, or what, I'm not sure. But you think any rifle should be enough to kill anything, especially when a bullet is aimed at the skull of any living creature. This is not the case, which is partially the reason why I'm leaning somewhere on the side of this being a supernatural entity, because there are things that just defy reality. Annabelle and her family had never seen the likes of this creature before, not until this one offshoot time where it revealed itself, not caring that it could be seen by the entire neighborhood, nearly killing her dog, but only shortly before her husband noticed and took immediate action. Since this happened, back in the summer of 2012, they have not seen it return, but after speaking with Annabelle's husband on the phone, he has told me that he still hears screams sometimes, far off in the backwoods. They're not always there, and sometimes they're more faint than other times. But he says he believes the screams are from this creature, whatever it is, since he knows just about every sound of every animal they live around, and it matches no known description of any creature he's ever run into. Another very interesting account, which I personally attribute much credibility to, this particular individual. They used to serve as an officer, and I hold their word as very truthful. They have nothing to gain out of making this up, and after speaking to said individual, they wished to remain completely anonymous, so we'll call them Daniel. Daniel told me that when he was an officer working up in the state of Maine for about 4 years, he was driving in a very rural area in Maine when this thing could be seen standing up in a field next to the road. He told me he got a full look at it, from head to toe, or what could be seen in the tall grass, and said at first he assumed it might be a person with a Halloween costume and a prop, but the more he looked at it and studied it, he realized it was far too realistic looking. And the most disturbing part is that it was indeed holding a weapon, looking somewhat like an old-style axe. He was so shocked and intrigued by this sighting, he actually slowed down his police car and took a second to really take it all in. The creature, because the direction it was facing, didn't seem to take notice to his car, but he got more than enough of a viewing than he ever could have wanted to. He told me that prior to that sighting, he had never even heard of or been made aware of the folklore legend of the goatman, and when he saw it, he was not only terrified, but puzzled at what he could be looking at. Now, Daniel knows all too well that these creatures do exist, and not just the southern states, but all along the East Coast as well. Another bizarre yet fascinating story comes from another man in his 30s that I spoke to recently. His name is Paul. Last name I won't reveal. But in the past year or two, he was hiking in eastern Pennsylvania when he encountered a strange smell and feeling. He said, if you've ever been in a thunderstorm, there's a smell to it. You could feel the denseness and the humidity in the air. You can just feel a storm coming. That's what he told me that he perceived all around him, just from the moisture, the humidity, and the smell. Only problem was, the day he was out hiking around, it was clear skies, bright and sunny, and in March. Then, he went on to say that for a brief amount of time, the air surrounding him, from feet to head, became filled with static electricity, and he felt the hair on his body and head stand up. He told me it was one of the strangest sensations he's ever had. It only lasted for maybe 45 seconds, he recalled, but afterwards, he had the sighting that would change his life and forever make him rethink entering the woods. He told me this, and I quote, I was about 3.5 miles away from my vehicle when all of these things began to happen around me. I listened to my gut, because at this point, it was screaming I should turn back. Something was wrong. I wasn't sure what, but I know enough to always trust your gut. I began making my way back, having to climb down over this small ridge, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The goatman. The thing that I'd only ever heard about in stories, a legend that I always thought was fake. But here I was, seeing it in person, and I'll tell you this, laying eyes physically on this sort of being is the closest you'll ever get to physically seeing a demon in real life. Easily 9 to 10 feet tall. This thing was towering, and to me, resembled more of a minotaur than it did a goatman, but still had that very ugly demonic look to it. It did not have any clothes on. It did not have an axe in its hand. It seemed to be making its way across a large ridge and wasn't paying any mind to me. Had it looked over in my direction, it could have easily seen me. It's not like in that moment I had any brush or anything to hide behind. I was sticking out like a sore thumb, had this thing just turned its head. I'm glad it didn't. It continued off into the woods and was gone. It was going at a pretty good pace. It appeared to be on a mission to get to somewhere. Maybe it came through a portal. Maybe that's why I experienced the static electricity feeling. Maybe that's why I smelt the thunderstorm on a clear, bright, sunny day. After having follow-up phone calls with Paul, he informed me that he has since gone back to that same section of woods that he supposedly saw the goatman. He hasn't seen it since, and it's not going to keep him from doing what he loves most, being out in nature. But he is very much more aware now of his surroundings, and aware of the existence of legends, or things that he thought were legend. One of the things we talked about when we were on the phone, and I'll never forget this, is when he told me, you know, if goatmen exist, what other supposed legend that we were told growing up doesn't exist, now exists? This opens the door for all realms of possibilities, including Bigfoot to Chupacabra, and even ghosts. The last eyewitness story that I'd like to share with you in this email comes from a young 19-year-old gentleman named Clay, who was out on an evening hike just this last year in 2019, when he saw, on a small segment of beach in South Carolina, what he described to me as a half-man, half-goat figure dragging, now here's the disturbing part, dragging a human body behind it. Where it was going, he wasn't sure, but he immediately didn't feel right and called 911. Police were able to go down there and inspect, but they never found anything. No footprints, which should have been impossible to not find, considering this thing was walking in sand and dragging a human body behind with it. It's eyewitness stories like these that truly disturb me when you hear just how frightened the individual was upon seeing this thing off in the distance. I have tons more stories that I can share with you, and I hope you are open to hearing them. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the stories that I've sent you thus far, and if I'm lucky, maybe you'll decide to use them. You have full permission to. Let's keep an open line of communication, as I'm sure if you do use this, your viewers will be hungry for all sorts of other cryptid sightings. I've got plenty, as I keep close tabs with many individuals with their own horrifying personal sightings. Thank you, and take care. If you or somebody you know has a story or encounter they would like to share with me or have me read on this channel, please send it to stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. The email can be found in the description below. Back in the late 90s, for a brief period of time, I did a few search and rescue missions that left me disturbed. It's not that I couldn't handle the job or even pass the training. It was the result of two specific search and rescue missions that I'm going to tell you about. The first being a young man who had just turned 21 decided to go out by himself during a blizzard up here in Colorado when he was strongly advised against it. We can't control people and tell them what not and what to do. We prefer to let people make their own judgment calls, and wherever that leads them to is where it leads them to. Unfortunately, for this young man, it led to his death. He was reported missing, I want to say about 48 hours after he had gone. Nobody could find him. The conditions of his travel and disappearance were bittersweet, having a pro and a con. The good news is, the blizzard we had predicted did not hit the area in question to where we had to search, or where his body had disappeared to. But the con was that he still disappeared, and finding his body would prove to be worse than we could imagine. After this young man was reported missing, we weren't quite sure if he was dead yet, which is why we went full on with our search. The search lasted 9 whole days when we finally caught trail of him, making it easier since the blizzard didn't hit the area, giving us more mobility and accessibility to areas beyond normal reach. The thing that struck us as very odd at first was that his scent ended on the trail that he said he was going down. Our dogs followed it to a specific point and then stopped, as if the trail just suddenly stopped with it. I'm trying to think back and remember how exactly we found his body, which might be a little fuzzy in my memory, so forgive me for that. But the story goes that at the end of the 9th day, we ended up finding him in not one piece, but pieces. He was found on a ledge about 1,200 feet higher up in elevation than the trail he was on. Virtually impossible for anybody to climb in those winter conditions, not even having the right equipment. We're talking about a 90-degree vertical wall covered in thick ice and other dangerous elements, making it impossible to scale. His body was found at the very top, and here is where it gets gruesome. We found him in pieces, in a circular pattern. His chest was by itself. His waist was also by itself. His thighs, legs, and feet, forearms and arms and hands, all severed separately with perfect knife precision. The wounds were not cauterized. They were surgically and precisely cut. However, he was dismembered. It was done by somebody who knows what they were doing. Even the bone and joints were cut at very specific points, and each piece of his dismembered body was placed roughly 50 feet away from the other piece, in one large circle, buried beneath about 2 feet of snow. The other piece we'll never quite figure out is we never found his skull or head. Every other piece of his body was there, without clothes, by the way. We have no idea what happened to any of his gear or clothing. His dismembered pieces were completely naked and left exposed to the temperatures. What it had appeared to be is his cause of death was somehow unknown, but after he had died, or presumed to have died, he was dismembered somehow, and then taken in pieces and laid in this circular pattern. It's very possible he might have died from hypothermia and threw off his clothes and then froze, but that still doesn't explain the dismemberment or how he managed to climb a 1,200-foot cliff wall. If memory serves me correctly, the autopsy reports proved inconclusive to how and which he died, but personally, I'll never get over the manner in which he died and how he was found. That kind of stuff just sticks with you for a long time. The second search and rescue story that I wanted to tell you about happened with an older man who was 78, in great shape, mind you, very active, very fit for his age, and very mentally well. Wasn't suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia at all. He ate very clean, was a very well-known individual in the community he lived in. Many loved him and had nothing but good things to say. Until one day, in early July, he went missing. Like the 21-year-old from the last story, he too went on a solo hike, like many outdoor enthusiasts nowadays do. After he had been reported missing for X amount of time, the search was called. This guy, we searched even farther, higher and lower, and found no traces. It's as if he had just vanished. But here, for this story, is where things take a weird twist. The dogs happened to catch his scent, and led us to an area, not only completely off the trail, but in an area that didn't make any sense for him to be in an area where the brush and forest was incredibly dense and thick, making it near impossible for a 78-year-old man without heavy equipment to work through. Now, the dogs didn't get us through the woods. They led us to this area of woods, and then stopped and began whining. Well, now you're ready for the twist. I wasn't here on that search and rescue team for this segment of the story, but many of my close friends, who at the time were my colleagues, were. And this is the only time that I can ever think of that the search and rescue team was called off indefinitely for this man's case, as sad as that is. The report was that they were all nearly jumped and ambushed by a group of large, 10 to 12 feet, hairy wild men with spears and rocks, some of them throwing logs in the direction of my colleagues, while others began screaming, banging on trees, and making all sorts of ruckus, as a warning, you better leave this area now, or you're going to die. Many of those same friends, when they recount this to me, you can see and tell the terror in their voices and faces, having to relive this memory. Unfortunately, for this older man, his scent trail led right into this area, where these things or wild men were, as everybody called them. I wish that when I signed up for this job, somebody could have had the decency to sit me down and explain to me that I was going to encounter things that would defy all rationale and explanation. That they could explain that I'm going to see things that don't make sense, hear things, experience things, hear stories about things that aren't supposed to exist. Now, all I can do is share my experiences in hopes to educate those that are willing to listen. Story 2. The Underground Base. Did some volunteer work for the Forest Service industry in Minnesota back in 2010 and 2011. I usually am one to try and stay out of government and military affairs, but I'm pretty sure, based on the things that I heard, there is a large military base or transfer center underneath a portion of the park that I worked at. Let me explain. Much of my time volunteering, I would spend it shadowing some of the other rangers, because for a while, it's what I was convinced I wanted to do. I remember there was one time I was doing rounds with a fellow ranger, and me, being in training, was still learning all the ropes, and this is the first of many times this happened. But I would hear this incredibly loud rumbling from underneath me. It was the equivalent to being maybe 20 or 30 feet above a New York subway. Although in New York, I don't think you can hear the New York subway beneath you, because the streets and the city life is so loud. But I'm trying to put your imagination there, to where it sounded like a train going underneath you. I know the thought of an underground train isn't all that exciting, but there were other sounds that I heard that resembled that, and would make me think otherwise. I'm not saying that the sound I heard that was coming from underneath me was indeed a train. It was just this incredibly loud rumbling, like some sort of heavy machinery. Something was going on, and to my knowledge, there are no known military, government, or any other kind of buildings within miles of that area. Randomly, all throughout different days, I would hear everything from loud machine humming to banging to other sorts of weird machinery sounds. There's a few times it sounded like I was hearing a stick of dynamite go off, far below my feet. I would even sometimes feel the ground shake, very lightly. But the weird thing is, any time I would ever bring it up to one of the rangers, they would either ignore what I said and act like I didn't mention anything at all, or they would quickly change the subject, being very careful not to acknowledge what I had said. I thought it was super weird. It was as if they knew something they couldn't mention anything about. Now, I don't know if this is some conspiracy among rangers, or if there's actually a military or government base underneath this area of the park, but it makes you wonder what really goes on in these parks when nobody else is around, when nobody else is listening, when people, the staff, the rangers, all know things that they're told to keep quiet on. None of this, now that I'm older and more aware of the things that truly go on in the world, none of these things surprise me anymore. And in fact, I'm now more confident than ever that there probably is something being hidden underneath that park. If you or somebody you know has a story or encounter they would like to share with me, please submit it to stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. You can find it in the description below. Story 1. Creep NASA. About a year ago, I was with my friend. I don't want to say her name for privacy reasons, but we'll call her Emma. Emma and me were going to the mall. I knew when we get there, we would see some people that she knew. Not that I knew, because I didn't open my circle much to other people, enough to make new friends. I don't remember much from that day, since it was a pretty long time ago, and I'm not friends with her anymore. The way we were getting there was by the city bus. She had 2 $1 free bus pass cards with her, for me and her. When she said that we were going to the mall on the bus, my heart sort of dropped. I have no explanation why. I just had a weird feeling. My mom knew I was going to the mall, and so did Emma's. They trusted us enough, and my mom dropped me off at Emma's house. We were there for about a half an hour, while I was sitting on her couch, and she was getting her unfinished chores done, so her mom would give her money for the mall. We then walked over to the nearest bus stop, right across the street from where she lived. We waited a longer time than expected, because we somehow didn't notice that we missed the bus. It had probably stopped at a bus stop a few blocks down. We waited there for another 30 minutes, but it felt more like an hour. It began to rain half the time we were waiting there. We both decided to get under the bus stop place. It had 2 little benches and something to cover our heads. The moment we both sat down, we both got our butts wet, so we immediately got up. The bus finally arrived, and we were filled with joy, until we got on and realized there was a lot of sketchy people. But one seemed to pop out the most. He was wearing a shirt that said NASA on it. It stands for National Aeronautics and Space Administration. You are maybe wondering why I just randomly said that. Well, this information will be important later on. Me and my friend has sat a few seats away from this man. He looked a bit strange. I quickly realized a few minutes later that he had been staring at both of us. I whispered to my friend, "Don't stare right away, but the man who looks weird near us is staring right at us." He then, right after, said, "Hello, how are you two?" I noticed my friend was more scared and in some type of shock because she hadn't noticed before that he was staring at us, and I had just told her so. In that moment, I felt like I was in some type of dream, because I had read and heard true scary stories, and they always began in this type of way. We both said, in a kind of scary voice, "We're okay," in horrible and scary silence. Then again, and a few minutes later, he asked me if I knew what my shirt meant. I quietly said no. He then explained to me what it was, and I said, "Oh wow, I didn't know that." Then my friend had gotten on her phone and texted me, "Our stop is soon, thank God." And I replied, "Yeah, thank God." We got off, and the man got off too. And that's when me and my friend really got ticked off. Instead of being suspicious and whispering to one another, we got our phones out and texted each other a short and brief conversation. I was the first one to text and say, "The guy is right behind us, Emma. Should we run? Walk fast? Call 911? She replied, "We shouldn't run unless he gets any closer." Remind you, he was half a block away from us. He then started walking in a sort of speed run. Me and my friend were right behind the mall, which was close to the store, Macy's. We began running, and the man sort of just stopped and walked back. He went into the store and talked about what had just happened for a few moments, and told the people that we ended up meeting with. I don't know about her, but my adrenaline was pretty high. We were there for about an hour, around maybe 45 minutes, and I had mostly completely forgot about what had happened to me and my friend. I had bought a smoothie and earrings. My friend bought a shirt and a hoodie, and a strawberry refresher. I got a call from my mom, and she wanted to pick me up. And I was already pretty tired, and really wanted to go home. My friend also decided to leave. She had to get on the city bus to get back home. The situation with the man came back to me, and I could feel my heartbeat racing for some reason. We both walked out from where we came in, Macy's. We both joked about how the man would randomly pop up again. I seriously do not know why we did that. We were standing by a garbage bin that was right next to the exit and entrance of the door. We were both on our phones, waiting for the bus and my mom to show up. My friend was still next to me because of the situation that had happened, and we both knew that being in pairs was better than being alone. Then, I get a call from my mom, saying she was only a few minutes away, and to get my stuff and everything ready to go. My friend's bus was coming in around 5 minutes. We then both got off our phones, and realized there was that same man, a few feet from us, sitting in between two bushes, staring at us. I thought he was homeless, and maybe lived next to the mall, where there was a bathroom and occasionally food. He got up and began walking toward us in a very slow way, as if time made him go in slow motion or something. I then noticed my mom's car was coming towards me, and my friend and the man started walking away slowly in slow motion. We were both really relieved. My friend Emma got into the car, and my mom was confused. I then explained what happened, and she was more than happy to take her home. Me and her spoke about it over text, but then we never spoke about it again. That was one of the worst things I have ever experienced, and I hope not to some other day again. Weird stranger at the mall. Let's not meet again. Story 2. The Blue Flame. I was around the age of 5 when this happened. It was a typical cold winter weekend night, and I was a kind of an annoying kid sometimes. I look back and love and appreciate my mother for for having to deal with me as a kid. I was really bored, so I kept nagging my mom and asking her if she could take me to the store or to my cousin's house or somewhere fun, and she said no. It was already night and dark outside. I now look back and now know why she said that. She got really annoyed that she just told me to go ask my dad if he could take me and my brother and sister to the store. My brother is 1 year younger than I, and my sister is 3 years younger. They were sitting on the couch with my dad, watching TV. I then asked my father if he would take me and my siblings to the store. He said no the first few times, because he had agreed with my mother. But then he felt bad, so ended up taking us. Me and my siblings all got our rain clothes on, raincoat, and rain boots. I'm pretty sure my dad got out before me and my siblings because when we all got out of the house to get into the car was already parked to go. We were halfway to the car, and my dad yells, "Oh, I forgot the car keys and my wallet." He then asked me if I could take my siblings to the car and put their seatbelts on them. We all got into the car, and my sister was sitting on the seat behind the driver's seat with her seatbelt on, so she couldn't see the driver's seat like me and my brother. So, me and my brother were both halfway standing up, since we were both a bit taller than the car was. Our heads were slightly down, touching the top of the car. I noticed my brother turned around, and I looked at the driver's seat for a good period of time. I noticed a blue glowing floating thing was sitting there. It scared me at first, but it looked like one of the little blue things that Brave the Disney Princess was stepping on in the movie. I was 5, so I thought it was so cool that I had encountered one. Right when I saw the blue light, everything sort of felt dizzy, like it was spinning, but I could still see the seat and the blue thing on it so clearly. It drove around my house a few times. I asked my brother if he saw that too, and I think he ignored me. But then we both saw my dad come out. We both sat down, but I don't remember where me and him sat exactly. I whispered to him and remember him kind of brushing it off. He mumbled something, but I don't remember, and I couldn't hear well. Everything sort of felt dizzy after seeing the blue thing. We get to the store, got our candy, and left. We were all getting off the car, and for a moment, I had the urge to tell my mother and dad, but I did not end up doing so. I was too scared that they wouldn't believe what I had just seen, and I thought if I told my brother, and he did not also see it, he would make fun of me. A few years later, I'm around the ages of 8 to 10. I remember that memory and the thought maybe it was a dream at first, but told myself that it felt way too real and vivid to have been one. I told my brother about it 2 times. The first time, I was really scared for some reason. I built the courage to tell him, and he said that he did remember, but he kind of ignored the rest, and I just left him alone. Then, a few months later, or 1 to 2 years, I remember that memory and already telling him once. I told him again, and he explained it more, and he did not brush it off anymore. He said he also saw the blue floating thing, and that he thought he was the only one that saw it. I told him about it going in circles around my apartments. He said he also remembered that. I felt like he lied about that part, because he stopped making eye contact, turned around, and went quiet. Maybe he felt bad, or just said that for some reason. I then told him again, a few minutes ago, and he explained it more, and was way more open about it. He said that he saw a blue flame floating thing, but that he didn't see the car go around the house. But I did. I did not ask my sister, because she couldn't see anything from where she was sitting. As I've mentioned before, it still gives me chills to this day, thinking or talking about it. I'm very happy that my brother finally decided to be way more open about what happened, and was very honest about everything. I now know that what's happened was seen by two people, and had most in fact had to be real.